Thanks for the intro, Damien. And Damien's part of and leads our amazing Ryerson chapter of Engineers Without Borders. Some of you may be involved or may have been in touch with them. And they're an amazing, dynamic group of people on campus that you absolutely have to get involved with if you're not already involved with these other amazing, dynamic groups on campus. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to share a little bit about my story. I'm excited to share a little bit about what I think is necessary, or what I think might be about change-making, what change-making might be about, and tell you a little bit about some of my experience that's led me to come to these conclusions about what change-making might be about. I want to start with my background, because I think one of the things that I believe, the first thing that I believe change-making might be about, is knowing a little bit about yourself, and knowing a little bit about your background, and knowing a little bit about where that comes from, or where you come from. So let me tell you a little bit about myself very briefly. I'm a refugee from Montreal. My parents left in the mid-70s, and they indeed felt like refugees, leaving as Anglos a society that was actually starting to no longer accept them, and as Anglo-Jews, a society that was starting to blame them for not accepting them. And they left to Toronto and set up a life here. And they moved and created that life out of basically nothing. They had a hatchback, and everything they owned in the entire world fit into that hatchback, plus just enough money for first and last month rent. And they came into Toronto, and they got first and last month rent for me and them, so the three of us in a bachelor apartment. My brother came along a couple of years later, four of us then in a bachelor apartment in Toronto. And you'd think that what you would do in that situation, if you have two kids and you have no money, is you'd go seek stability. That's what you would do if you weren't my parents. Instead, what my dad did is he said, I'm bored, I'm going to go start my own business, and it's going to be a business consulting firm. And my mom said, okay, why don't you do that, come home early enough, and I'll go out and earn our living as a cocktail waitress at a hockey rink. Any of you from Toronto know Chesswood hockey rinks? That's where my mom worked as a waitress. And it worked, amazingly. My dad started a small consulting business. He grew it a little bit into a larger consulting business. It was involved in real estate, and he was doing deals, and he was very good at putting together these deals in a really interesting way, and was able to create a very successful business, then started owning commercial real estate, and then started owning hotels, and actually created a really comfortable life. At some point, my mom said, the hell with this, I'm interested in being an entrepreneur too. And she said, well, I was a nurse, that's what she was trained as. I love helping people, but I don't want to go back into nursing. I don't want to go into a hospital. Instead, I want to be a clown. So my mom became a professional clown when I was about sort of 7 or 8 years old. And so my dad's out running this successful business, and we're kind of climbing the income ladder in this country that creates enormous opportunity. Everywhere you look, there's opportunity, right? Especially in the 70s and 80s. Well, frankly, now. So if she's climbing, as my dad's climbing that, we have now a little bit more stability. My mom is a clown, a professional clown, eventually creates this amazing theater show. And what I experienced as a kid was seeing this, my parents going after things that they really loved. What I also saw is two things that left an indelible mark on who I am today. One was that every single step of the way that they had more money and more opportunity, they sought to use that to give other people more money or opportunity, or to work and fight for things that they believed in. My dad ran in the 1984 federal election as about as much as a one-issue candidate that you could possibly run as. He ran as an independent candidate, and his election signs said nuclear disarmament on them. They didn't even say his name. He came in second. Because he cared about getting these ideas out. He cared about bringing justice into his life and into his success. My mom wasn't thinking so much about that policy side and that big idea. She was thinking about helping as many people as she could, one by one. And she invited them into our house. And so I grew up with people who were trying to get on their feet again, who were living on the street, and who had a job but needed to save a couple months' rent so that they could pay first and last. And so they lived with us. With people who, in the early 90s, were part of the initial stage of the AIDS epidemic, and they needed a place to get healthy, and so they lived with us. A couple of kids from St. Lucia who their father said, I want you to get a really great high school education. So they lived with us for a couple of years. A babysitter of mine who started to live with us because my parents found out that her mom and her dad were really abusive. And she lives with us. And there are probably 36 people who lived with us throughout my childhood, who I learned from, who I saw, and who weren't ever treated as charity. They were treated as family, as people that just kind of needed a place to stay, as people who we just invited into our houses. So that's the first thing that I learned. The second thing I learned from my parents, and that left an indelible mark on me, happened both at the end of the 80s, when my mom got extremely sick and had to quit clowning and in fact almost died. And came back from that, and through kind of normal medicine, didn't really do much for her. And in fact, the only way she came back from it was through more natural living, natural holistic type of thinking about health. And so she reinvented herself and started a holistic health business as an entrepreneur. Clam business was gone, died with almost her dying, and she started this again. My dad in the early 90s was wildly ambitious and tried to scale and expand his business right at the same time that the recession hit, and bankrupted this fairly large and successful business. Pretty close to losing their house while I grew up in incredible privilege. Certainly, I felt that, and I saw him struggle. But he started another business, and that was a bit of a failure. And he started another business, and that one now is a bit of a success. But throughout it all, what I saw from them is failure was actually cool. It was part of life. It's what you did. You tried stuff, and if it was worth anything, there's a pretty good chance that it would fail. And so these two marks were left on me. As I grew up, as I came into high school, as at some point in high school I decided I'm going to go be an engineer, even though the only reason I wanted to be an engineer was because I was really good at building Lego as a kid. And so I went into engineering. I knew nothing. I didn't even know what engineering was. And I went for Waterloo engineering because Waterloo was the best engineering school there was, even though I didn't know what engineering was. And I somehow snuck my way into Waterloo with not very good marks. And I didn't do anything, actually, for my first 2 years, except drink a lot and play a lot of sports. And there was no such thing in my mind as, like, am I a change maker? Am I a social entrepreneur? Is there a social bone in my body? Absolutely not. Not until I was 20, 21, around 21. At which point I said, you know, what's this all about? Like, why am I here? Why am I looking around campus and seeing that we could be doing so much more? What are these ideas of justice that I learned as a kid? How am I bringing them to my life? And that's when I started getting involved. And getting involved wasn't starting an organization. Getting involved was putting my hand up and saying, oh, yeah, I'll volunteer for that role on the Engineering Society. And then I got addicted. I got addicted to being involved and being engaged and creating little bits of change. Creating those little bits of change that would then lead me to sort of say, maybe we can create some bigger bits of change. And so that went through a series. I started a bunch of things on campus, or was involved in starting a bunch of things on campus as an undergrad, then a bit of a grad student as well. And it came to sort of the end of my time as an undergrad, and we looked around, myself and a good friend of mine, Parker Mitchell, and we said, we have a lot of really smart people in this class who are about to go off. First of all, during university as engineering students, they were basically not leveraged very much at all. Their brains were leveraged to solve, I've actually calculated this. Engineering students are forced to solve between 3,500 and 4,000 separate problems in their undergraduate degree. 3,500 and 4,000. Most of those problems are actually not real. Out of 4,000, 3,950 are just equations on a page. And the answer is 26 newtons. 26 newtons of what, right? Like, it's a measure of force. That's it. That's what they are. So that's how engineering students were being leveraged. That's how their brains were being leveraged. Or for the odd design project, they'd build, an automatic beer pouring machine. We said, it's got to be something better to do with these guys. And at the same time, we saw all these massive problems in the world. Problems that seemed intractable. Problems that hurt us when we thought about them, that seemed absolutely unjust and that we needed to address. And so we wanted to do something about that. And that's where Engineers Without Borders came from. It came from who I was, where I came from, but also sort of just seeing and believing that there's something out there. I said I'd sort of talk about a few things that I've learned about what changemaking might be about. The first was knowing where you come from. Let me tell you about 3 more things, very briefly. The second is that changemaking might be about being open to being changed ourselves. Changemaking might be about being open to being changed ourselves. I went to this conference recently and I saw this great billboard, picture of a billboard that one of the speakers put up that said, "You're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic." It's pretty insightful. And we need to be open to thinking in different ways. We need to be open to learning. We need to be open to diving into these issues and these ideas because they're hard and because they're interesting and because by exploring them we learn more about ourselves and we become changed. Absolutely. And the best way to influence somebody else is to be open to being influenced yourself. And that's what we've experienced with Engineers Without Borders. Our first idea of what Engineers Without Borders was all about was organizing a team of 10 university students to go down to some nameless community in Bolivia for 10 days who they knew nothing, the community knew everything, and yet we were going to come with sort of some kind of arrogant notion that in 10 days we were going to change this community. We thought that was a good idea. And we did a couple of those projects. And ultimately, some of them turned out okay, and some of them were blatant, massive failures. But we were able to actually learn from that and be open to saying, wow, that might actually be the wrong way to do things. That might actually be the wrong model of working and the wrong model of pursuing change. And by being open to that change, we were able to change ourselves and change the organization. And I always say, everybody asks me, okay, what's entrepreneurship all about? To me, entrepreneurship is about the art of believing absolutely in what you are doing, while at the same time knowing absolutely that it is likely to be wrong. That is entrepreneurship. And that's what we've employed with EWB, with Engineers Without Borders. And that's what I've seen changemaking is all about. We went from that model to now where we say, listen, EWB is about really three things. One, it's finding great people in Canada and Africa and elsewhere and helping them realize their greatest potential to be change agents and change leaders. Second, Engineers Without Borders is about finding some of those change leaders and helping them create new ideas, whether they're in Canada or whether they're in Africa, that will change the way things are done, and supporting them along the way. And third, Engineers Without Borders is about finding all of those ideas and somehow stitching them together and seeing if some of those stitched together actually can have policy influence or can change higher level systems. That's what EWB is about. Pretty big difference than sending 10 students down for 10 days to build something. And a lot more powerful. And it's creating a lot more impact. And it's by no means perfect. And we'll continue changing. But being a change maker means being open to being change oneself. The second is that I think being a change maker could mean understanding that change is about 100 million, a billion small, courageous acts. Now, we have a totally different narrative in our society. Our narrative in society is change happens by some hero like me who stands up on a stage, who creates an organization, who rallies people together, and we get behind them, and we say, you know, that's somebody who creates change. Barack Obama, he creates change. Gandhi, he creates change. Rosa Parks, she creates change. That's a change maker. Crap. It's not true. It's a great, it fills our desires as human beings to have heroes. And some of those individuals are absolutely important. But change is created through hundreds of millions of courageous acts of normal, everyday people. Hundreds of millions of these. And it's inspiring because every single one of us in this room is absolutely capable of that. We're absolutely capable of that. I think about something that we did with EWB a number of years ago. That was an idea, I don't even remember whose idea it was. It wasn't mine. We had this idea that we would give out cards to people as they were coming off of their subway morning commute. And those cards would, on one side, they're business cards, and they would say, hey, when you're getting your morning cup of coffee today, ask for certified fair trade coffee. And it said a couple of lines about what that meant. It meant people who would get a fair wage, who'd be living in and growing this coffee in proper conditions, environmental standards. And then on the back, it said which locations they could go in the city, which major coffee chains had fair trade coffee, and which ones didn't. And at the time of the 4 major coffee chains that were on there, 2 of them had a fair trade option, Starbucks and Timothy's, and 2 of them did not, Tim Hortons and Second Cup. So we do this, and it's the 9 a.m. commute, and we have literally like about 150 volunteers stationed at all of these subway stations around the city, giving out these cards. 1 p.m., we get a call in our office from the VP, Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Second Cup Canada. And she is livid. She's like, what are you doing spreading these lies? We're trying to get fair trade. And you know, we're on the phone, and it's sort of, I put her on speakerphone because it was hysterical. And at one point, you know, she says, you know, I'm gonna send my lawyers, and we're gonna sue you. And I'm like, great, yeah, give us a lawsuit. That'll be exciting for you. And then a couple of years later, and you can see it now, Second Cup has actually started to define themselves by the coffee chain that has the most fair trade options available. What happened was people took those cards and they went to those Second Cup locations. And they asked a simple question. Do you have certified fair trade coffee? Thousands of people asked that question. And it got the people working at those coffee locations to say, huh, do we? And then at Second Cup, they had to admit, no, we don't. They had to find out that no, they don't. And then enough of them started calling head office and were like, why don't we? And they said, well, we don't. Tell them we don't. Did that action result in Second Cup getting certified fair trade coffee? I don't know if we can say we were responsible for it, but I absolutely know that those hundreds of, perhaps thousands of courageous acts that day of changemakers absolutely led to some of the reason why Second Cup made that change. And that, to me, that courageous act is what it's all about. And any of us are capable of that. We're capable of asking questions that other people won't ask. We're capable of saying things that other people won't say. We're capable of helping somebody who's crossing the street. We're capable of changing the way that we live our lives, whether it's eating meat twice less per week, or whether it's bicycling instead of driving our car, whether it's looking around the university and saying, what is it that we can change? We're all capable of it. It's hundreds of millions of courageous acts that I think change is possible. My last point, and I'm getting in the 1 minute, so I'll make it really brief, is that I think what changemaking is about, what changemaking could be about, I think changemaking could be about hope and love. And that sounds really flaky and super hippie, but I really believe it to be very true. We are faced with some of the largest challenges that humankind has ever been faced with. I would say some of them, many of them, are existential. Humanity as we know it literally could not exist 50 years from now if we don't address these challenges sufficiently. That's, I think, fact. And it's pretty easy to look that in the face and to do two things, one of two things. Ignore it, or get so intimidated by it that, in fact, you feel as though you're powerless, because those are so big. But the reality is, I think that we need to believe, and we need to have hope, that actually change can be made. And I'll share a quote, just to finish off, from this incredible writer, activist, politician, Václav Havel, who some of you may know of or may have read. And he was, of course, in the former Czechoslovakia as a political prisoner, and then he eventually became president of the new Czech Republic. And he once wrote, "Hope is a state of mind, not of the world. Hope, in this deep, powerful sense, is not the same as joy that things are going well or a willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously heading for success. But rather, hope is an ability to work for something because it is good." And that, combined with love, not sort of this kind of love that's like romantic love, which you need to work at, but love that you believe in your fellow human being, I believe is what change really could be about. So those are 4 things to share with you and to take away, to think about. Decide if you like them, decide if you don't. Knowing who you are, being open to being changed oneself, believing that it's about 100 million courageous acts that create change. And finally, that you keep hope and you keep love really close by, because those are what are going to give you the fuel to create change.